Hey folks, we got a lot to cover today as we look at Volume 1, Chapters 1 through 2, and focusing on Victor Goes to College. Now, education is a main theme in the novel. It's a significant theme in the novel, at least. And Victor's education is incredibly important. So we're going to look at that in some depth this day. I should point out to you that we begin with alchemy. What is alchemy? You can look up a definition of it, look in Wikipedia, any source like that's fine. I'm going to call it a pre-science science, kind of. Someone might disagree with me on that, but that's just part of the discussion that we have about things. But it's the precursor or the forerunner to chemistry. So you can see the connection right in the words alchemy and chemistry. There's probably a song there that I don't know of. So alchemy would have involved incantations, rituals, rites, all sorts of things. It's really fascinating. You can see some cool stuff. And that's where we begin with Victor long before he gets to college. This is from chapter 1. I want you to notice this line because I think it's important. He says, natural philosophy, right up here at the top. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I desire, therefore, in this narration to state those facts which led to my predilection for that science. So he's saying natural philosophy, which is a philosophy about nature, just consider that for basically science, is what has determined his fate. And thus he's going to tell us what led to my predilection for that science, his leaning towards, his falling in love, whatever you want to say. Alchemy is this, as I've keep repeating myself, I've given you the slide here, and you can go look at a couple of books of alchemy. These two are mentioned in there. Cornelius Agrippa is a really important name. He did write books about alchemy, but there are also all sorts of books that were published in his name because people want to kind of tap into his fame. So young Victor Frankenstein comes across Albertus Magnus and his favorite Agrippa. So he's going to come across those things. He says he becomes a disciple of Albertus Magnus. So he becomes a fan of alchemy. And in fact, if you go back here a little earlier, you can see what happens when he tells his dad about this. He tells his dad, look at this, blah, blah, blah. And here at the end of this paragraph, he says, this is his daddy, Alphonse, saying, Cornelius Agrippa, my dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash. So then you really should read this section next because he talks about everything that happens to him as a result of his father kind of dismissing this interest of his. Read that and tell me what you think about Victor. Does Victor take responsibility for himself? And also read this and think about, he's going to say, if my dad had sat down and talked with me, maybe everything would have turned out differently. That's all I have to say to that. All right, so let's go back over here to this passage. So what did he hope to find? Well, he hoped to find what alchemists have always wanted. This is a little later on in chapter 1. He says, my dreams, this part right here, my dreams were therefore undisturbed by reality, and I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. So the philosopher's stone was this desire that alchemists had forever of being able to turn something into something worthless into something that's worth a lot. So take, just a stone and be able to make it into gold or silver. That's the philosopher's stone. It's kind of a cool old image. This is a more towards our time. It's still very old, a beautiful image of it. But he also said that he was looking for the elixir of life. So let me flip back there. The elixir of life. That's actually what he wanted. He says the latter, the elixir of life, of those two things, obtained by my most undivided attention. Wealth was an inferior object. If you were after the philosopher's stone, then you were after the ability to make gold and silver. So you wanted money, right? That's the sole goal. But he wanted the elixir of life. Wealth was an inferior object. That doesn't match the elixir of life. But what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death? If he could find the elixir of life, then, he could clear out the hospitals. Everyone could live a long time, forever. Everyone could have youth, potentially. The only way you would die, I guess, if a plane ran into you or something like that. How would a plane run into you back then? Okay, anyhow. So that's what he was hoping to find. But I want you to note here in this passage, because this is interesting, how some of the things he does. And this is him as a kid. He's a teenager. He says, nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghosts or devils was a promise liberally accorded by my favorite authors, the fulfillment of which I most eagerly sought. And if my incantations, let me say that word correctly, if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own inexperience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity to my lectures. In other words, some of the books he's reading have these rituals and rites that you could do that would bring up demons and ghosts that could do your bidding. Sorry, I just got an email. I need to mute the thing in the back. All right, anyhow, so this is the purpose of it. Here's an image that might help with that. This is from the early 1800s. Here are two dudes, and they're trying to raise up the dead. They're in a graveyard. It's night, kind of a cool image. If you look at these two guys, you can see they're standing in a circle right here, right? And you can see there's symbols in here, maybe some sort of words, some sort of chant, and so on. Dudes, dudettes, that's what young Victor Frankenstein was doing as a teenager. It's kind of like he was playing with a Ouija board, but they didn't have Ouija boards back then. So he gets in the circle. He's trying to call it ghosts and demons. And, classically, people who did that, they were after something. Oftentimes you called up a ghost because you wanted to find buried treasure. So he does that. He's unsuccessful, as he says here, but he thinks it's rather a lack of skill on his part than that those things don't actually work. However, as you read this section, you'll find that he begins to realize alchemy isn't it for him. He needs to find something different, but what's that going to be? In fact, that's the whole point of this paragraph right here, which you can pause the video at any time and read for yourself. So he goes to college. He's kind of over alchemy in some ways, not entirely, but he just doesn't have anything to replace it. In college, he'll find that replacement. So there actually was, I found this, I think this is hysterical. There was what I understand to be a very bad movie back in the 1990s of the college years with Frankenstein. And that dude here, if I remember correctly, he is the prince. He's the voice of the prince in The Little Mermaid. I believe that's what I read. So here's some more pictures of crazy Frankenstein having the time of his life in college. Love the hat. He's rocking the hat. Here's another picture. Oof, the 90s. Those were some fashion choices. And I've even left it here for you guys on the PowerPoint slides. You can read this review of the movie and Entertainment Weekly, and I'll go to the cut to the chase. It got a D+, so not so hot. But Victor Frankenstein, remember the monster doesn't have a name. Victor Frankenstein in the novel, he does go off to college. He goes from here in Geneva, Switzerland, modern-day Switzerland, up to Ingolstadt in modern-day Germany. And so that's a distance of, if you went straight, it'd be about 300 miles, but it probably would have been about a 400-mile trip, and it could have taken him up to 2 weeks. Travel would have been much more difficult back then. So when he left for college, he left for college. Here's the town that he goes to. Here's an early depiction of it, and here's a modern photograph of the town hall in Ingolstadt. Just go around the house today, just saying Ingolstadt as many times as you can. Here is the old anatomy building in Ingolstadt. And so when he gets there again, right, he's kind of getting over his fanboy nature towards alchemy, but he needs something to replace it, and he finds a replacement in the chemistry lab. So this is chemical lectures, and people were fascinated by chemistry, as we should be. Chemistry is amazing. So what you're going to see, here's the big idea, is that though brought up on alchemy, Frankenstein turns, in his college days, to natural philosophy, in particular chemistry. He turns to science. The monster thus isn't going to result from magical rituals and rites and incantations. Rather, he stems, pun, right? Stems, one more time, stems from science. It's not that funny if I had to keep pushing it. So he should have taken an English class. I'm just saying, y'all, he should have taken an English class. It was a chemist in a lab coat who made the monster, not a poet in tweed. Now, when you get there, he has two teachers. Monsieur, that's my understanding what M period means, Monsieur Kremp and Monsieur Wildman. So Monsieur Kremp, look how he describes him. He says he's a squat man, little squat man with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. In other words, he's ugly. Absolutely ugly. But then he meets, and what Kremp does, Kremp irritates him. He makes fun of Agrippa too. It's nonsense, and that doesn't endear Victor Frankenstein to Kremp's study and Kremp's chemistry teacher. But then he meets Monsieur Wildman. Now look at the difference here in how they're described. Monsieur Wildman, he appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. In other words, he had a his face was nice. He had a nice look on his face. He looked like a kind person. He had a few gray hairs, covered his temples, just a little bit of gray. But those at the back of his head were nearly black, so his hair's in pretty good shape. His person was short, so he's not a tall guy, but remarkably erect, so he wasn't stooped over. He stood up straight. And his voice was the sweetest I ever heard. So this guy is going to convince Victor to pursue chemistry. What's interesting, though, here is you're having this thing called physiognomy. And physiognomy is, here's a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1797, says that there is so intimate relation between the dispositions of the mind and the features of the countenance is a fact which cannot be questioned. Basically, what they're saying here is your appearance, your face, reveals your character. And that is not science, but a lot of people would have understood it. And regardless of that, and it's so problematic, it can lead up to all sorts of terrible things. But for our purposes, this can be a trope in fiction, and it often is. You've seen this ever since you were a kid, that good people in novels and movies and such, good people are good looking, while bad people are, well, they're not especially good looking, right? You've seen that in every Disney movie you've ever watched. Well, that's not true, but some of the old-timey ones, right? So anyhow, what you have, I'll leave this to you guys to read just for time's sake, but Waldman convinces him of the value of chemistry. Waldman shows him around his laboratory. He talks about the various machines. He gives him a reading list, and the chapter ends. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. So like he said at the very beginning, he's going to explain how he came to be a person involved in natural philosophy, and we've seen that progression. I just want to point out how this all ties back to the preface with which the novel began. Remember, the event on which this fiction is founded has been supposed by Dr. Darwin and some of the physiological writers of Germany as not of impossible occurrence. And so the very first line of the novel has led us to understand that this is going to be a novel about science as then understood or imagined. This is a really cool depiction of Victor creating the monster in his lab. It's from a 1920s edition of the novel. But here's the big point. Victor is going to use science to create his creation. Victor brings life into the world, but he doesn't do it the old-fashioned way. He doesn't marry and have a baby. He doesn't create from nothing like God. He doesn't have that ability. He doesn't call up the dead like a magician. He doesn't use alchemy. This story is not about alchemy. This is a story about chemistry, about natural philosophy. Chemistry and science is what he uses to create his creation. Victor, as the subtitle of the novel says, is the modern Prometheus. So he's going to make a man, so to speak, for which he is going to pay a terrible price, and for which his creation will pay a terrible price, and for which all the people whom Victor loves will pay a price too. So that's all I got for today. You guys rock. Have a good afternoon or morning or evening whenever you're watching this. Bye.